We're jumping back into Star Wars for Warhammer 40K episode 22 with Storm Breaks by a fan with too much time. Last time around, somehow, the battle, which has been going on for half of this entire runtime, it seems, has intensified. And how it has, I don't know, because on the one hand, it's literally still the first day as far as I know, and that's kind of batshit insane. This is just a very narrow slice that is similar to how the battle started, where you had very narrow focuses, and I'm just loving this because it doesn't feel like I'm being jerked around nearly as much. That said, I kind of like being jerked around too, but I really should cut that out. That is definitely not a phrasing I want associated. I'll have to remember to cut that in the future. Future me, please don't be a dick. More importantly, I'm going to jump right into this because I'm looking forward to this, man. You guys know the deal. Link below, original video, hit it up. Let's get started. So what do we got here?
Lazarus was at the lip, his gear set, but he
Back
had
to the
not
40K
gone over
side.
yet. The Major and a few others were still laying down covering fire for the men strapping on their ascension gear. The tech priests had welded strips of steel to use for cover along the lip, and while these barriers could only absorb a couple of blaster shots before being penetrated, they were certainly better than nothing at all.
I just want to say that that's probably one of the most impressive technical displays that anyone has said about the Mechanicus. Now, normally we get like these big, huge, sweeping things of see all the stuff they made or the maintenance they do, or the common joke of them going after toasters or not actually understanding what they're doing. It's just kind of incompetent. Here, though, it's just a simple, fast, dirty, hey, I'm going to put up barricades immediately during the shootout that are only good for a couple shots, but I'm going to put up enough of them that it actually counts. That is just a really competent display of being able to bunker down and do a simple mechanical process really damn fast, showing that they're just really competent in a pinch. Honestly, I know it's not the craziest thing that they could possibly show their competence on, but the fact that it's an immediate, very short time limit, under fire type situation is actually very impressive to me. Well done, fan, on showing that.
But now the Replicae were back at it, and if anything, dealing with the penitent engine had only made the Republic toy soldiers angrier by far.
Yeah,
he
probably
watched as a
bit.
cascading rain of blue bolts and falling mortar fire started at the tail end of the retreating Calambian line and began to run
that's
up
his
its length like
spine.
a
The rest of the
ruthless
intestines
avalanche
pulled
of
out.
thundering
Joy.
death. The coordinated wave of overlapping munitions was fed by a quintet of nearby surviving Caterpillar walkers.
Ooh.
Their main cannons becoming a part of the incoming tide of obliteration, which the Major watched blow the last of his retreating men into bloody pieces.
Okay, well, what else is
He
coming in?
barely had time to register the loss, the volley not ceasing its thundering as it ran down those not already at the lip. Instead, the cracking, roaring front of death picked up speed as it made its way straight for the edge. Holy fucking throne! Everybody jump! Lazarus called out, panic riddling his voice as he tossed his las gun aside and spun around to face the open air behind
shit.
him. His guts hit the bottoms of his feet, and he felt parts of him deep inside snap and break as he ran headlong into the gap. He opened his mouth to scream and was unsure if he was succeeding, being far from the...
I gotta ask, is he being thrown off or did he full out jump? Because I honestly can't even tell with all the shit going on. Because when he talked about parts breaking, I'm like, wait, did he get hit or is that more just his own interpretation in his head? This is actually something that I would highlight as a more literary aspect, or not, like a more of an editing aspect. And one, it pains me to say that because I hate spot editing. That said, I'm an asshole, so I'll do it anyways. Just because with how it's being set up, I'm not sure if this is a piece that's happening in his head that he thinks those things are breaking because of him jumping off the side and it's just like, oh shit, right in his face while he's trying to scream. Or if due to the previously stated cannon fire, that's what made him feel that because it actually happened. It'll probably be resolved right away. But these kind of moments when you have that bit of uncertainty in substance, they're not horrible if they're resolved quickly. They're not a game breaker, but it's one of those things where you can probably try and get away from that. Maybe just take a moment, clarify the language slightly. The way I would probably state it is just a quick moment of, and then he jumped followed by, now not exactly like that. Or the explosion hit him and then followed by, rather than just saying, get over the ledge. And then he talked about how he felt, where there's that bit of, I'm not really sure what's causing that. It's a minor nitpick. And frankly, if you found this in a book, I would not even bother pointing it out because There are usually so many worse options. So many worse. And not even just for bad books. I mean, good ones too. So that's not the biggest deal breaker. I'm just being an ass about this because, frankly, Fan doesn't make a lot of mistakes. So they're kind of like, ooh, shiny. Yeah, he's a very competent writer.
The only one, as all the remaining Columbians ran at full speed for the ledge. Lazarus's body got halfway past the lip before the pressure wave from the pursuing explosions propelled it far past where his leap would have carried him.
Okay, so the answer was it was mostly in his head, and both ended up happening. He jumped and he got hit by the explosion. Neat.
Sending him sailing into the yawning cavity of the city below. For all that, the Major was, in truth, still intact. A fact he could not appreciate in the moment,
most of his face.
Screaming his lungs raw as he swung down on his cable, silencing a second later as he passed from the waking world. He returned to it abruptly as his limp body collided with the wall, knocking all the breath from his lungs and leaving the Major scrambling and gasping in a most undignified manner for several prolonged seconds.
Hey, only undignified manner.
No commissar was present to witness it. He was also fortunate to have neither struck the side of the platform with too much force, nor from any angle that would have broken his neck.
Oh yeah, because he basically just free jumped, went unconscious. No, it's not free jumped. Bungee jumped with a solid cord instead. And depending on how long that is, and considering he passed out, how much room did he have? Also, he is propelled further by Oh, that's why the explosion might have actually saved him, because it might have moved the cord out to its full length, so he swung down the full arc rather than just being jerked and his everything shattering when it was pulled back. Because a bungee dissipates the energy by stretching and then recoiling, where a cord itself would dissipate the energy by tearing you to pieces. Huh, that's actually interesting.
Several Columbians had not been so lucky.
Yep.
Some had jumped in their panic without any cables at all, and others had managed to escape much as Lazarus had, only to meet with grievous injury or death upon striking the wall.
Yeah, Lazarus is lucky as hell, man.
The beleaguered Major groaned, hanging from the line, dazed and swinging for several moments before he finally blinked out of his stupor and got his legs positioned to the side of the building. He felt like dying. Every burn, every bruise and broken bones screaming at him after the stunt he had just pulled, their chorus of pain joined gleefully by a host of new injuries. But, at least, he had found himself nearer to the bottom than the Columbians who were choosing to descend naturally. With a grunt and a kick of his legs, he began to descend towards the end of his cable. As he did, he indulged in the fact that they were not being shot at, and dared hope that the Republic clones would assume them all dead. Looking around, he could see the thousands of Imperial soldiers making their way down.
How big of a unit did he bring with him? I was under the impression that he had a significant force here, but it was mostly an ambush force. I was not expecting multiple thousands to have been on the bridge with him. I legitimately thought it was maybe 20 to 100, and I thought maybe 100 was too much. Thousands is a lot more than I was estimating. Also, if anyone knows where the hell they found this art, I was almost thinking it was something out of a different series, but no, they got the Aquila on the gun right here. So yeah, no, this is 40K art. I have no idea where it's from though. I'd say it's Necron based on how it looks up there, but no, that seems to be a bolter as well, and they have a sword. And there's some kind of net and a lash over there. This is definitely a Wastelander on a hive world outside of the actual hive itself, huh? But probably one of the safer ones because they're actually able to breathe outside of the hive, which is, oddly enough, not always the case.
Struggling to keep their footing in the watery downpour. Most of the men were completely exposed as they focused on their descent.
Or it's a tech priest.
And Lazarus realized without much effort what a slaughter their withdrawal would become if the clones of the Republic realized that they were still alive. The Major felt a little hope enter him as he reached the end of his cable segment, deploying a smaller anchor to the spot before releasing the mag hook which had tethered his longer line to the building they were scaling.
Do you think he'll notice that?
He leaned left as the magnetic end fell down, hearing it thunk against the metal below him, followed shortly by a string of creative Columbian curses. As he finished...
On the upside, if you're cursing, you ain't dead yet. Granted, that might come later.
Finished reeling in the hook, he noticed that there were odd metal wedges sticking out from the building, jutting from the wall around and below him. They were just large enough for a big man to crouch behind, and some even had what looked like heavy weapons mounted onto their vertical surfaces, barrels facing up. Lazarus sighed in a soft bit of relief as he recognized the handiwork of the tech priests, who had clearly...
Seriously, now this is just impressive. Not just putting up that tiny bit of cover, which is probably hiding the grappling effects until they're removed. I mean, they'll eventually figure it out when they see there's just not as many bodies as they knew people were shooting at them. But either way, wow. The tech priests are not even in this scene. It's not their point of view. It's not being them as a main character, but they're frankly doing more work here than I think they've done in anything else. Everything else has been, like I said before, big things that they were said to have done. Here, though, here are the things they did just in a short amount of time between the various aspects of this right now, which we know are a very short period. It's damn impressive. They already put up entire points of just defense and weapon lookouts on the side of a building that they just got to. That's just really impressive construction mechanics.
Gone about creating some cover and even little hardpoints to use in their descent should the worst come to pass. Lazarus had just managed to reattach the magnetic hook to the wall in front of him when that passing began. He winced, head jerking about as a scream was issued from above, muffled by the pounding rain, yet soon joined by a chorus of others.
Knocked off the edge?
His eyes darted, blinking ice water clear as he scanned the spreading chaos above and around him, catching telling details as he did. A soldier was hanging limp on his own cable, while another was convulsing just below the first, also hanging, smoke rising from several burning holes in his body.
Were they flanked by another edge?
Then, a third man cried out and died in a series of spasms, hanging directly above Lazarus. Looking up, he narrowly avoided the dead man's falling corpse, his cable frayed and severed, its ends red hot and smoking.
Yep, they found him. That is definitely the worst. I was hoping they would get more time, but frankly, if they actually did, Fan probably would have skipped over it, so in hindsight, it makes sense. Are they being shot from a different angle or straight down?
Looking up through the now
down is
cleared
bad,
space,
angle is worse.
The Major began to understand what was happening. With a grunt of ignored pain and intense panic, he fingered the control mechanism for his ascension cable and began to go down. "The Replicate have spotted us! Descend, soldiers! On the double!" He barked into his Vox bead. The Republic soldiers far above them were lying down, using the lip of the platform for cover as they peeked out with their long rifles and fired downward into the escaping Imperials. This, at least, seemed to limit the number who could engage them, but they were difficult to fire back on or suppress.
Yeah.
Still, the guardsmen tried, both the Major and his Calambians. Most of the Imperials drew their weapons, descending on their automatically unwinding cables while firing back up at the clones. Lazarus saw one replicate corpse drop, and then another, and another.
Hey, way to fire, man.
Tumbling blurs of white, ghosts of the Republic's heretics, their souls dragged silently to hell. The sight was more than a little gratifying for the ailing Major, until one corpse collided headlong with a soldier under his command, a vengeful wraith refusing to die alone. Lazarus grit his teeth and swung himself over to one of the armed hardpoints the tech priest had set up, grabbing onto the wedge of metal when it came within reach and adhering himself to the spot with his short anchor. Firmly affixed, he sat back and looked at the weapon which was now mounted before him, resisting the urge to whistle as the long, blessed form of an autocannon revealed itself through the haze of oncoming rain.
Okay, this part I'm looking forward to, because they already set up, hey, the Mechanicus, who were demonstrated to be really good and competent at doing things really fast, have set up an autocannon turret for when you just happen to be going down retreating. Frankly, this is actually more impressive than the sister throwing off and just completely jumping. I was like, hey, by the way, we have sister support. Penitent engine. This right here, I think, is built up a little better because of those moments of, see, they built that lip really fast. They can construct things fast. See, they did it again with these autocannon turrets on the side for when you're fleeing. Is it needless building? It probably argued yes, but it works. And because they built up so many things so fast and they showed that kind of competence that I was geeking out over, this is a good moment that You know, you could have easily just said, okay, they just got to the bottom, but no, extra drama. We get to have the moment of see how this gun compares, because as far as I know, we've not actually had demonstrations of this kind of weaponry here. We've seen the basic las guns. We've seen more powers and high-end individuals. Now we're getting just a nice demonstration of what heavy weaponry is going to look like. And I actually have no idea, because in terms of heavy weaponry, they're kind of not too far off as far as I know. Just different. It's probably stronger because in general, the Imperium just hits harder.
He checked the chamber and firing mechanism with a couple of cursory glances, finding the weapon oiled, loaded, and mounted with a particularly long spool of armor-piercing ammunition. The Major was grateful, as he would be unable to reload it in the position he was hanging in. He was less pleased with the makeshift mount.
This doesn't look like... You son of a bitch. Someone actually made a replica autocannon, because that looks like just a random bit of minutia. I'm not sure if it's real, but that looks like a weld right there. Oh, so it could just be painted over, well, glue as well. I'm not sure which would be crazier. If someone actually decided to build on top of a machine gun or a howitzer or whatever this is called and just add the Imperial aesthetic, or that it's all completely faked out and they made an amazingly good looking one. Probably that one, just because it's way too clean to be anything that actually saw use anywhere. That's so freaking cool, man. Oh, wow.
Which did
I'm
not
geeking out
allow
over the
him
image
to
he's
move
using,
his
I know.
aim very much, but at his distance, adjusting by a few centimeters would be all he needed. Lazarus squinted his eyes in the rain, taking one more moment to identify the shapes of his men and the origin of his foes, before he oriented the
Blast
gun
in the right direction.
and squeezed down on the thick trigger.
And
in
it's
his
armor
hand.
piercing, so it's physical
The
munitions,
barrels of
not
the
what the
weapon
clones have
spun
good
with
armor
a
against.
whine, before abruptly spilling forth a thundering shower of molten lead, like defiant anti-rain, falling up instead of down, burning and killing in place of cooling and nourishing. He fired through the lip of the platform, penetrating the thick civilian metalwork and shredding the clones who hid behind it for cover. His example was soon followed all across the broad side of the vast descent, as men took up similar positions and manned heavy weapons to cover their retreating brothers and sisters. All the while, the majority of the Imperial force continued its frenzied attempts at retreat, and the Major dared believe that many, if not most, might escape.
But
it seemed the tech priests had saved the day, their emplacements proving a decisive advantage on this oddest of battlefields. Or at least, so it had seemed. Then Lazarus saw the first brilliant lance of emerald light, piercing the veil of rain above him and tearing into the side of the building. The humming beams continued cutting men in half and severing ascension cables as they strafed across steel, sending loyal calamity.
Oh, of course, because they finally got the angle. If it's straight down, they can't really shoot across too well. But yeah, if they're just doing long lasers across, they could just strafe the side and get rid of almost all of them. That's not good.
Ambience tumbling and screaming to their fates. This was joined by bone-shaking blasts produced from the steaming maws of mass driver launchers, carried two at a time between wings which spat luminous death. The impacts of their solid and explosive munitions were enough to send ripples and rolling distortions through the metal and glass of the building's surface, shattering and shaking loose tens of men in but a few milliseconds.
Tens out of thousands, though.
Lazarus looked up and out, away from the clones above him who were shooting down and out towards the yawning void. There, swooping and hovering like the vicious storm snipes of cursed Carcosa, were the murmuring, hovering forms of the Republic's...
I'm sorry. Carcosa, isn't that... I might be wrong, but isn't that a Cthulhu reference? Oh, it's because there's a lot of Cthulhu references in 40K. Never mind. It's probably something to do with one of the legions that just decided to use the name because someone at GW thought, heh, yeah, Cthulhu, nice. And they can't sue us for using it either, which, considering some of the other things they've done, is a very important distinction.
Clone gunships, now redeployed on the orders of a vengeful commander.
Yeah, because they have air superiority right now.
Lazarus groaned,
That is,
unhooking his anchor
I mean, this is
and
why air
swinging
support
down
is
and
very
away
important.
from the emplacement a mere second before it was pounded into slag by a rain of medium blaster cannon fire. The Major fell and spun out of control, yelling in fear and working hard not to pass out again, to keep himself just level enough to retain some measure of his senses.
The fact he's alive, man,
He
makes Lazarus a
activated
very
the
accurate
winding
name.
release on his belt-mounted rappel spool, undermining the force of his swing by releasing more and more of the length and losing altitude all the while. The fighting retreat of the Colombian forces dissolved into an unabashed rout, thousands of men running, or rather rappelling as quickly as they dared down the side of the building.
There's not much other
Death
choice
chasing
either.
and catching them in droves as they went. They'd never make it. It was over, the
But-
Major knew. Almost over, he corrected himself. Lazarus reached into his belt and pulled free his last grenade. The grenade.
What?
When he had been made a major, he had been given access to just a few select pieces of war gear.
There are very few things in 40K that you refer to as the grenade. Did he get a fucking vortex grenade? I mean, there's no way. Like that's on the level of, you know, destroy the planet. You don't fuck with that kind of shit. Titans have that kind of armament. There's no way he got one. It might be something different, though, if it isn't what I left my ass off.
That had been available to his predecessor. From among all of those things, he had chosen one particular weapon among them to make sure he kept a grenade. A vortex grenade.
Oh, hell, man. This is one of those, if you're close enough to throw this, you're close enough to get caught in the blast, unless it's a lot smaller than I thought, because god damn. Yep, if there's a time you need the giant power of fuck you, this would be it. Although, all joking aside, it destroys things by literally opening a warp rift in them and taking everything into the rift. But considering the warp here is the force and it's so much more peaceful, I mean, it still takes them out of the fight, but how would they interact on that? Like, do they just disperse because it doesn't have the craziness making pseudo matter to tear them apart later? Would that make it more or less dangerous? I don't actually know. Huh.
He looked at the grinning, skull-like weapon he gripped in his
Yup.
hands, grasping the pin and trigger before thinking better of it. He scanned around instead,
What?
eyes moving in a frenzy before spotting a soldier descending relatively nearby, a grenade launcher strapped to his back.
Okay, so he's not just throwing
The
it.
Major clenched his aching teeth and began to swing, moving back and forth until he caught the man's shoulder, making him cry out and struggle.
Yeah.
Hold on! Hey! Listen to me! Fucking listen! The Major said to the flailing soldier, punching him across the face to punctuate the point.
He's not shooting you, so he's a
The
good
young
guy.
Colombian grunted, covering his face and ceasing most of his struggling as he cradled his broken nose and looked at the Major. Sir? He muttered past his fingers and dripping, bloody nose. Your grenade launcher! I need it! He yelled over the sounds
He
of
got a
men
fucking
screaming
vortex
and the
grenade.
high-pitched whine of laser weapons sawing through metal. No!
Oh, You know, I was saying, hey, we're not being jerked around too much. You get to the point where he has a freaking grenade launcher with the freaking grenade. And you switch to a meanwhile. I'm going to hope it's just switching to the clone perspective to see their interpretation of what a vortex grenade looks like on their end. Because if we suddenly just randomly go to space, I'm just going to be sitting here going like, okay, admittedly, I'll still enjoy it because it'll probably be well written and enjoyable. But I'm going to pretend it pisses me off. I mean, there's a little bit of Schadenfreude in it myself. I don't think that's how that's supposed to work. Huh. Yeah, future music dick. I'll just explain it away that way. I'm watching more. There's no way I'm stopping right now.
65 watched from his position on the
Oh.
lip as the slim resist.
And that does confirm it. We are back to the absolutely batshit insane clone commander who is literally just kind of the exact opposite of Lazarus. The guy who's so crazy, he didn't die, but became saner. somehow. And then there's the clone commander who's calm and precise. And that is becoming increasingly insane to the point where I fully expected to start saying rip and tear. Granted, it'd probably be more accurate to say blood for the blood god or skulls for the skull throne at this point.
Distance of the retreating Imperials was butchered. His gunship support arriving as promised and targeting the Imperial hardpoints before then taking their time to scrape the fleeing cultists off the platform with persistent laser and blaster fire. Added to the clones like him, who were shooting down into the retreating imps from above, it left little chance that any of them would survive the commander's retaliatory assault.
But
then, something odd happened. Something 65 had no way to anticipate and no understanding of. It began subtly, or at least relatively subtly. All the colors in the air changed, shifted somewhat. At first, he thought it was something wrong with his HUD, but...
Oh, I'm going to love this. I'm sorry. This is literally one of my favorite things at any crossover. That moment of what the fuck hitting so hard. So far, everything has been horrible, overwhelming, but within their realm of comprehension. What they are looking at in universe is the equivalent of saying, here's a mechanical weaponized force grenade. Weaponized Jedi in a can. Delivering you a pile of fuck you. I want this so much.
Soon he realized it was far more than just that. And he was not the only one being affected. This effect swiftly deepened, becoming so shocking that the fighting faltered all around them.
Yeah.
The colors on everything seemed to invert, white clones becoming black, blackened clones becoming white, and more.
Spill-off
The effect lasted only 8 or so seconds and was accompanied by a bizarre sound, a sound 65 could not hear with his ears, but rather with his mind. It was like a deep-throated whispering, so low it was barely there, yet undeniably present.
Oh.
Then, just like that, the effect ended, and everything...
Now that is very interesting. Who is whispering is actually a very important question, because normally when you open up anything to the Rift, to the Warp, you hear literal "I want to eat you" from demons. And if that technically counts as the nicest thing you hear, I'm not going to specify further on YouTube, because if you go into any accurate descriptions, it will get you demonetized and or getting community guideline strikes, because you just don't. It's bad. This, though, is opening it to the Jedi's Force, because that's the Warp equivalent here, and hearing a voice talking it is rather unique at this point. Are they hearing a voice of a Force ghost? Something else? Or maybe just the Sith in general having that whisper, because Palpatine has an outsized presence in the Force? I don't actually know. I mean, it could technically just be the voices of everyone screaming who they die and they join the Force, whether they like it or not, because life is all connected. But that seems like it would be kind of a cop-out answer.
Everything seemed to return to normality for approximately 2 standard seconds. The next sound was a real, normal sound, and he heard it as a loud pop, similar to the sound of a corked bottle being opened. It was such an innocent, innocuous sound when compared to what
just
it was.
Just a cork
heralding.
opening, really.
65's eyes grew wide and ached in his skull, red tears rimming his vision as he looked straight into the following interspatial detonation. He saw it, but he could not understand it. In a report, he would have described it as a black hole, but one which was not shaped like a circle. If pressed, he'd describe it with great distress as a gash of colorless thirst or unlight. He would attempt to explain its shape as both ultra-Euclidean in nature, while undeniably drafted over a bent and twisted surface of nothing. He'd babble about its size, both large enough to touch so many of the gunships, yet too short to reach the men and clones on the building. Within a theoretical interrogation, thoughtless to the integrity of his mind, the clone would scream about the things he saw inside. The things which looked at him without any eyes, or rather, looked at him with his own eyes, laughed at him with his own voice. But at the time,
That is not a good indication. I was working under the principle that the warp was more passive here, but if there's things that could look back at you from the warp on this side of the conflict, that means it is not passive. I guess that would imply the pseudo-demons are technically there, and if the dark side is the equivalent of demons here, and the possession is literally demon possession, then what we're looking at is probably dead Sith as the possessed. And these would be the actual bodies that are less hostile, but also still very present. And they're aware.
as he witnessed it, all he could do was scream. The clones had no idea not to look into the vortex as it was spawned. The explosion, if one could call it that,
Broke their
was
sanity
not
further.
bright, and it cast no shadows. In spite of that, few Imperials made the same mistake, ducking their heads down and hiding their eyes as the unimaginable weaponized rent in time and space swelled in the air behind them.
And then there's the moment where you realize, oh, I had a beard hair around my mouth. What the? Meh. More importantly, this is still the nicer version, as in he looked into what is the equivalent of the warp, and he still has a mind to think about all this stuff in Scream, as opposed to what would normally happen in the 40K verse, getting nommed in his head by psychic parasite demons, or just, demons in general, because they're kind of all parasites.
The tears in the air spilled and split away from their origin, the eldritch technology that forced the phenomenon to occur, acting in the semblance of a shaped charge.
Yep.
Sparing most of those on the building while hungrily seeking those thinking minds within the gunships. Twisting arms of void-like force warped the air and spiraled out, lancing through all but the farthest and most dispersed of the gunships, causing...
This is a direct entry into the Force itself, with beings who are Force-aware on the other side confirmed. How many of the Jedi are going to feel this? Because a lot of the times, whenever you do crazy shit in the warp and it makes an impact, in the Force, you can feel that. It's very much a disturbance of the Force. It's a giant gaping hole letting the things on the other side that they didn't know were on the other side come out and have a bite. It very well might be something you should be very worried about. And considering some of the things in Legends that I'm not sure Fenn is using or not, because I think he's been using most of Disney canon, which has been starting to acknowledge a lot of the legends that people thought weren't going to be acknowledged. There's a lot of things in there that could be a problem, depending on how they interpret Abeloth and how aware and in the reality they are. That is... I wouldn't think it would go that way, but that is the biggest Force monstrosity I can think of, short of what they're trying to interpret the Sith as in general.
A horrific myriad of effects. Some ships exploded, combusting into balls of pinkish fire. Others seemed to shrink and fall away, as if having been tossed down a long, inescapable tunnel. And others still merely vanished, the details of their unraveling rendered indescribable by the very nature of their unmaking. 65 struggled to make chronological sense of the explosion. For while it seemed to last for hours, the rain only seemed to resume falling after its damage had been done.
Yep.
And the sweltering wound in reality sealed itself. The commander lay, blinking blood out of his eyes as he tried to recover from what had just happened.
And he's probably more crazy
now.
now.
Fire was exchanged. He could hear and see that through his red-tinged vision. For a couple of heart-stopping seconds, 65 feared all his air support had been destroyed by the weapon, whatever it was. Soon, rage replaced fear as his command HUD began to update his details, revealing that most of his gunships were still in one piece, but all of those were clearly fleeing the airspace. "Wing Commander, Come in! Turn around!
They probably all looked into there and saw the giant pile of nope. And they don't know the Imperials only have the one. I mean, if you think there's more of that coming, you want to get out of there because you don't defend against giant piles if this is an actual WMD have scaled up.
Turn to the field! 65 ordered in a hoarse voice. But he received no
Swear,
reply.
man, 65 is going to become another
He
villain
shouted
here.
the order with increasing ferocity, but was either cut off or ignored, and the air support that all but guaranteed his revenge did not return.
And that's the word I was waiting for. That is going beyond just overzealousness. This is making it personal in a way that clones who do that usually are portrayed as the bad guy early on in the Clone Wars. Again, I can't say for later on because I haven't seen that. I need to get to that. That's on me. But talking about revenge, this is him wanting to kill. This isn't falling out of orders. This isn't doing the plan. This is, fuck you. I want you dead. And I love it because it's very much showing his villain origin story, basically. I'm sorry, I keep geeking out over his interpretation, especially because this entire episode is juxtaposing him to Lazarus, who is very much becoming sane in a non-sane world that is literally trying to kill him, where 65 has all the advantages, oddly enough, considering the Star Wars side is usually losing, but he has the advantage of troops. He has the advantage of air support. He has the advantage of actually having an overwhelming amount of firepower, it seems. And he's just getting more and more desperate and more insane in his actions. I just love that because especially compared to each other, Lazarus versus 65, it's such a good dynamic of seeing one who you would expect to be insane becoming more sane and more competent, and the one who's supposed to be competent becoming more insane and more unhinged. And I love this. He's going to get worse, though, and I kind of want to see just how bad it gets.
He clenched his teeth, felt the warmth of his crimson tears reach his lips, tasted the metallic tang of his own blood. It was pooling in his helmet, and so he rose to his feet and released the seals. With a hateful gesture, he tossed it aside, cracking the visor with the force of his throw.
If he doesn't become possessed, I will be surprised.
Again, past his feet, past the ledge of the park, and saw that while no one was shooting any longer, the Imperials were still affecting their retreat.
Because they know not to look.
Still slipping through 65's
And a lot of the clones are probably
fingers.
fucked in the head right now.
He spat blood and spun to the officer at his right, a clone who had been formerly crouching at his side, now standing and at attention. Jetpacks equipped on everyone, he ordered.
They just have jetpacks on hand?
Sir, the clone said hesitantly. You heard me! Mount up! Immediately! We are not letting a single imp get off this wall! On the double trooper now! 65 spat, anger yanking each word past wet lips. Sir, we don't have enough jetpacks. We can supply maybe a tenth of our force. The rest will... The officer began to report. We'll use ascension cables. Hand them out. One for each trooper without a pack.
You're chasing them down the side of a wall. Because by the time you get there, they'll just be able to... Oh my God. This is so many levels of stupid. They're doing it out of desperation going down the wall because they have literally no other choice after the ambush. You could literally just stand at the top and take pot shots with massed overwhelming fire. And wait for the people who are flying the planes to get their heads out of the entire, oh shit, literal rent in reality just destroyed people. Which admittedly is a very justified reason if you don't understand others. But when none others happen, they'll probably figure out, oh, no, just the one. Okay, come back and F them up. You just have to start shooting where they're going to run to keep them from getting there to hold them. But because he's going crazy, he's literally not thinking through. He wants to get in the melee with this one. Honestly, I fully expect him to become the first possessed or the first cultist on the Imperial side. Technically, they're not Imperial yet. The Star Wars side, the Republic side, because he's hitting the hallmarks of just overwhelming negative influence.
The commander finished for him. Yes, sir. But, sir, your face, the clone added. What about my face?
Warp influence?
65 snapped.
What happened?
The man pointed a slightly quivering finger. You're bleeding, sir. A lot. Your eyes are... the officer began.
Red.
My eyes are fine. Get about your orders, trooper, he snapped back. The clone saluted in response.
I mean, if he's only
Yes, sir,
insane and
he
bleeding from
said
the eyes,
before
then it's
doing
still nicer
as
than most people
ordered.
looking into the warp.
In the
You don't do
meantime, 65 selected the men who would join him with jetpacks, picking them out by name and number.
Of course, yeah, he's definitely one of the people going for it. Yeah, I'm assuming everyone going with him is going to die. He'll survive somehow and probably do something even more unhinged after it.
Each responded to his bleeding eyes and face in some way, but he shoved all such concerns ruthlessly aside.
He's very much leading by intimidation at this point without realizing. And the fact that they're all reacting means this is probably more of the actual impact of the warp directly on him in a very physical sense, warping his body. Still technically nicer than 40K's warp. In the sense that they didn't actually eat his eyes out and let his brains literally leak through them as a slurry that they could sip up. Because I'm sure that's been a description used somewhere.
He could see fine, and he was not growing any weaker, despite the persistent streams of red which fell from his face and began to dye his armor. Soon enough, they were ready.
Yeah,
The
like an
other
offering
men
of blood
lined
even.
up in staggered formations, ascension cables rigged to belts and secured behind them. Bring up the wounded after we are deployed, he ordered to the officer. Arm them and lay them down by the edge of the park. They can help us as best they can from there. 65 finished, sheathing a damaged vibroblade into his belt, now checking his jetpack controls, subtle twitches riddling his movements. The officer said nothing at first, simply watching as 65 tested his pack, sparking the flames beneath it. Sir, he said a moment later. 65 felt rage spike through his every nerve and
Yep,
fiber.
that looks like corn,
He
all
needed
right.
obedience right now, not conscience. What? The commander yelled, spinning to fully face the officer. The clone seemed undaunted behind the visor of his white helmet, merely pointing over his shoulder at several massive looming forms. The ATTEs are here, sir, he reported in a monotone.
Called it. They just needed to wait. That's actually pretty fast, though. They got that. But I guess no one else shooting giant piles of, upscaled, or I guess in this case, downscaled WMDs would do that.
In spite of the man's lack of enthusiasm, 65 felt his rage melt into perverse joy. Now, yes, now his revenge could truly begin. For his pod, for the clones, for the Republic.
I swear, the dichotomy between 65 and Lazarus is becoming one of my favorite overarching narratives in this entire story, because I listened to the aftertalk Fan had when this entire initial side story came out. This wasn't supposed to be a main narrative. This was just the, we're going to throw it in. It's kind of cool to see what else is going on. Maybe I'll make it important. And it is now really freaking amazing. Frankly, it sounds like such a major narrative point, even if there's so many fronts going on right now that the most important stuff is probably still in space. But the stuff on the ground is also important. And somehow they have air superiority, which frankly, the fact that they have air superiority already is kind of insane. And I like it. It's just saying, oh yeah, by the way, we have better pilots. Not even going to show it. And frankly, I have no idea how you would write those scenes. I can visualize so much of it, but visualizing from a cockpit feed or an air command feed showing how that would sound, I can't visualize. I have no idea how Fan would have implemented that. And if he could, good for him. That's well beyond my wheelhouse to say anything about. But this right here, this very human dynamic of watching one person break while the other is building themselves up in the exact same situation, coming from exact opposite ends. It's just, like I said, I love the dichotomy. I love how Fan is juxtaposing it, because apparently I can word occasionally. And it's just so good. I can say more, and I probably will in later parts, because there's going to be more, unless Fan immediately cuts away to something unrelated. It's a good thing he never does that. Yeah. But more importantly, if you haven't already, link below, original video, hit it up. And you have no idea how important it is right now to avoid spoilers, because I want to ask, what is going to lead from this? Being exposed to the warp, seeing that there are demons in there who are active, that it's not as benign as by we, I mean, I initially thought. There are active voices there. There's one they all heard. There's the ones looking back. There's the red painting down. He's not dying from blood loss. His arm is being painted red. If that's not a sign of Khorne is existing in here, and he might not be as powerful, but he is here. Yeah. That's a lot more indication that chaos isn't being brought over. They're already here, just not as strong, and may or may not already be enjoying Palpatine. I wonder if that's why he initially was talking about shooting down and starting this planet, because he wanted to stop anyone from the Emperor's side of gaining power over here, because they could actually stop the entire demon aspect if they weren't immediately opposed. I really wonder how much Fenn is leaning into the new canon Star Wars was doing, where the entire rule of two was literally just possession by a series of previous masters. That's how it went. I don't know. I've seen some people who like it, some people who don't. I think Fenn mentioned it, but I honestly cannot remember at the top of my head. If he's playing into it, though, Palpatine would be a much greater foe. Just because he would have a lot of experience, almost on par with the Emperor in time, maybe. Hard to say. Either way, though, you have no idea how tempting it is to just finish this right now. I can't, because I literally have to adult. Stupid adulting. But I'm going to do this later. It's going to be awesome. I'm looking forward to it. So what I'm basically saying is link below, original video. Hit it up. I'll see you guys in the next one. Adios.